Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to another Calm Business Conversation. I'm really happy to be talking to Lakeisha Belkadogan. Is that how you pronounce your last name? Okay. Today, Lakeisha and I have known each other actually for quite a while. We met in a course, that we both take, and in the group that came with the course. And so we've been following each other on Instagram, and we subscribe to each other's newsletters. And so I was going to invite Lakeisha anyway, because Lakeisha is also a calm business person. I mean, we don't call ourselves necessarily calm business people, but we have a certain way in which we, conduct our business, in which we, just engage online. And we're very aligned in that regard. And so I was going to invite you anyway. But given that, this is February 2023, and it's Black History Month, so I also wanted to talk to you under like that umbrella a little bit, and talk a little bit more about like your experience as a person of color. And when we, refer to a person of color, we will talk about, being a Black person in this context. And now I have to say, I am not a Black history expert. And my experience is probably different to a lot of Americans. Even though I am now an American citizen, I grew up in Germany. And where I grew up, even though I grew up in a big city in Cologne, we didn't have a lot of Black people in Cologne, actually. And but, being German, we also have a very dark history, with the Holocaust. And so when I grew up in the, 60s, 70s, 80s, my generation, it was all about making amends and making sure that history doesn't repeat itself. Now, my understanding is that education here in the US, when it comes to Black history, is lacking a lot. And they're introducing, laws in certain states, to minimize that. I mean, it's very different to how I grew up. When I grew up, we focused a lot on our, history with the Holocaust and all of that, what was leading up to it. And it's a very, very dark history to be confronted with. I mean, that was only my grandparents' generation. My grandparents actually lived through that. And we talked about that a lot in my family too. And I have to say, even with all of that, so I feel like, when I grew up, it was all about inclusion and embracing our differences, whatever the differences are, culturally and all of that. But even now in Germany, right-wing neo-Nazism and all that is on the rise again. And it's like, what is going on? I mean, if we haven't learned from our history, I mean, what are we doing? And then we see it, of course, in other parts of the world as well. And this is kind of the background, against which we run our own businesses, and in which we live, in our case, in the United States. And it's easy actually to get a little disheartened, I think, because it's like, do we ever learn anything as human beings? Honestly. And, but I wanted to just talk about, with Lakeisha, about our own experiences, so I would love for you, to share a little bit about, first of all, what is it that you do, and your own experience of growing up, and where did you grow up as a Black person, in America. So welcome, Lakeisha. I'm so happy you're here.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it was such a pleasure to meet you and the course that we've taken. I've been going back to it lately and to the Facebook group and looking at all of our notes and things.
Yeah.
But hello, everyone. I'm Lakeisha. I am a book coach on Instagram. I've been calling myself a book enchantress because, I love fantasy and sci-fi and all things magical and woo-woo and stuff like that. So I've been calling myself that on Instagram. And
I
I,
love
I
it.
believe it's been sticking because people have been referring to me as that. So that's been interesting. Let's see, like, so before I started my business, I did have like a regular 9 to 5 job. I was a legal assistant. I've pretty much been in an admin position maybe for about 15 or so years or whatever. And then, like many, lost my job as a result of the pandemic. And I kind of decided that I didn't want to do that anymore because I had a 3 hour commute that's to and from.
Wow.
I wasn't able to pick up my daughter from school. I had to literally call an Uber for my son and so he can get it. And then I was just like, I don't really want to do that anymore. I kind of want to get away from the hustle and bustle. So I said, well, I already know how to proofread and edit. Let me try that and see where it takes me. And now I'm here as a book coach.
And yeah, doing great things actually. I really
So yeah, I love working with writers. It's a blast to get to, read and stuff all day.
tell us
But
a little bit more before we get into like your upbringing, all that about using tarot in
oh
your
yeah.
practices.
Yeah.
I find that so fascinating.
I love to use tarot and oracle cards. So I use them in my own personal practice, and I also use them with my clients as a creative tool. It's so funny to me how people think that tarot is only for like predicting the future. And it's like, yeah, some people use it that way, which I think is silly, but because, pieces of cardboard can't tell you what's going to happen tomorrow. But I like to use them in a practical sense and for creativity. So, like, for example, and I was actually just talking about this on Sunday on Clubhouse. So I said, I'll pull cards in the morning. I usually do that every morning while I'm having my tea anyway. And so I said, if I'm pulling cards and I see a whole bunch of cups on the table, the first thing that comes to mind is to go upstairs, get your water bottle because you know you haven't hydrated for today. So I'm not even thinking about what these cards mean. I'm just looking at them in a practical sense.
Love that.
Yeah, so I love that. And then I also use them to help writers get unstuck because a lot of times people think that the creative process is linear, like, going from point A to point B. And for some people that can work, but for myself and most of the people that are drawn to me, our minds don't work that way. Like it does this and that and all this other stuff. So I like to
Well,
use
it's a
the
bit
card.
like that graph that you sometimes see. We think it's A to
Yeah.
B straight line, but no, it's actually more like
Yeah, it's
this.
like that and it
Yeah.
takes loops and all this other stuff. So I like to use the cards to kind of like get them out of their logical left brain and get them into their creative right brain. And I'm not necessarily working with people who already know what the tarot cards mean. Most of the time, I'm the people that are drawn to me, they have no idea what tarot means. None of the cards. But they're
Amazing.
like,
Yeah.
oh, I can just look at that picture and pull out ideas and like use that in my store. And I'm like, yeah, that's the point. And, I just had a workshop on that and they all had so much fun. They had no idea that you can use the cards that way. So yeah,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love
No,
to use.
I absolutely love that, because in a way, I mean, writing is a creative process. And
Yeah.
like you said, using something like these cards can really support that process. I just
Mhm.
think it's ingenious. I have not seen anyone do that for, book coaching, for instance. I think it's amazing. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I love to use it. It's a lot of fun. It brings play in because that's one of my
yeah,
goals for this year to bring in more play. And,
yeah.
and I love to use them in that way and for brainstorming. I even use them to like come up with topics for blog posts and newsletters and stuff like that. I can
Yeah.
just pull a card and like, oh, I'm going to write about that.
What an ingenious way, when you're thinking, well, what could I write about? Yeah, I absolutely love that. So yeah, so definitely, if anyone, hears this, definitely check out Lakeisha. I'll leave all of her links in the description, because it's just very interesting the way you do things and your approach. And I think it's hugely beneficial and effective,
Yeah,
So
thank
yeah,
you.
so thanks for sharing that. So let's talk a little bit about how you grew up
Mm.
and what your experience was, if you don't mind.
No, absolutely not. I actually grew up in my grandmother's house, my grandparents rather, they were both there. And it wasn't that my mom wasn't there. It was just my grandmother was one of those grandmas that, like, as soon as you bring the baby home, oh, just go step aside. I got it. She was that kind of grandma.
Love
So
it.
pretty much I like clung to this woman and, I learned from her, learned cooking, making bread and all this other stuff. And it's interesting because my boyfriend has this joke. I mean, he says it in love, but he's really serious about this joke that I grew up in, the hood or an urban environment, but I had no idea that I was in a hood or urban environment. And
Why
that
is
was,
that? Why is
yeah.
that?
And I think it was because of how my grandmother made life for me. Like, I was
Yeah.
always a schoolgirl. I liked going to school. That was fun for me. I know that probably sounds weird, but I'm a nerd. I like to, do school. So as long as I was doing well in school, she basically provided every single thing that I needed. I mean, there were times where like she would just spoil me rotten and my grandfather too. I don't know if it was because I was living in their house or maybe because I was the kid that didn't have both a mom and a dad in the home. Most of my cousins did. They had both their parents. I didn't. And that was one of the reasons we lived with them. So maybe that was part of it too. But my view of the world is a little different from other people of color, I want to say, or like my
Yeah.
neighbors or something like that, because, or even in school, it was just different because I didn't have those same experiences that they had. So even as a Black person, there were certain things that I couldn't relate to because that just wasn't my experience. Like I had everything. Like I had my own bedroom. I had a computer to do my schoolwork. And it wasn't like I had to be good to get those things. They were just given to me because, oh, you need this for school? Let's
Yeah.
just go get it.
Yeah.
So I kind of had that experience. And so it's interesting talking to other people about, what type of microaggressions or discrimination that you've experienced because I'm kind of like, mm,
Yeah.
I don't really know how to describe that because I haven't
Yeah.
experienced some of the things that other people have.
Yeah. Well, and in many ways, those are the things that many like white kids, get, and we take it for granted, that we
Yeah,
have that. And so was there a point at which you realized though, oh, hey, I actually live in the hood and this racism, is real?
it wasn't until let's say I was closer to adulthood, like late teens, closer to adulthood, that I kind of really figured it out. I was like, oh, people view my neighborhood as being the hood. And it was kind of eye-opening to me because it wasn't like the neighborhood was dirty or there was trash everywhere. I mean, it was like kind of like the development I'm living in now, like a bunch of townhomes, they're all connected. Cars, everyone has like one or two cars or whatever. It was like the typical like suburban type area, at
Yeah.
least to me, from what I understood. But I guess based on the zip code and the name of the city and stuff, that it was classified as being ghetto or urban or
Wow.
the hood. I mean, well, I didn't actually hear people calling it the hood. I would hear more it was ghetto or it was urban. But if you
Wow.
go into certain places in DC, because I live about 35 minutes from the city, certain places in DC, they kind of classified that as the hood. So apparently there were levels to this. It was the difference.
Wow. So once you kind of realized that, did it like change in how like how you felt, how you acted, how you engaged with
It did a
others?
little bit. It kind of made me feel kind of sort of like an outsider because again, I didn't have
Mm,
those experiences that, the people that I grew up with have. So when people would get around and talk about, oh, I experienced this when I was coming up and I'm experiencing this as an adult, I still couldn't have some of those conversations because even though now that I was aware,
yeah.
I still wasn't experiencing those things. It wasn't until I started going out into the workplace and, I was like a full on adult then, and I have kids and stuff that I really started experiencing some of the discrimination that most Black people experience on a daily basis.
Yeah. So do you feel, I mean, is that something that even now that, you're an adult, you're a mom, um, I mean, do you still experience that like on a like daily basis or?
I wouldn't say on a daily basis. I would say it's more depends on the environment that I am. It probably happened more when I was working outside of the home. I don't get too much of that now because I
Yeah,
do work from home, so I don't really interact with people that much on a daily basis.
yeah.
But in the workplace, definitely.
So how is this also informed like how you raised your own children? Because when we talked about this before, I think generally, we can say, I mean, our kids are our future,
Hmm.
so how we bring them up will make a big difference. I mean, if you look, for instance, look at Iran, I mean, a lot of those protests, that was really young children. I
Hmm.
mean, young adults and so there is a new generation growing up, and has this, also informed how you raise your own children?
Yeah, it has. So my kids are in public school now, but 2 years ago, well, for last year and the year before, I actually homeschooled them because I wanted to
Right.
experience that because that's another thing that kind of gets stigmatized that homeschooling is only for a certain type of person, or certain
Yeah.
type of mom. And, I experienced that too. So that was interesting. But it was nice to do that for 2 years because I was actually able to educate them on Black history. Because I kind of find it embarrassing to say, I've learned more about Black history as an adult than I did in school because they don't teach it. So, when
Yeah,
I'm,
that's so amazing to me that they
yeah,
don't do that.
they don't.
So
They don't. They teach bare minimum and they kind of
yeah,
gloss over the things that are really bad.
yeah,
So being able to go through and actually teach the kids and learn with them it was an experience because some of the things I honestly didn't know and they're looking at me like, "Well, how come you didn't know that?" And I'm like, "Well, they don't teach it.
yeah,
You're not going to learn this in school, like when you go back." And, I've been confirming, it's February there in school. And I'm like, well, what are your Black history projects? Like, what are they telling you to do and stuff like that? They either don't have any or it's the same, write an essay on Martin Luther King, or Frederick
mm,
Douglass or something like that. And I'm like, well, what about all of the other people who have done amazing things or had horrible things, done to them that should be common knowledge, at least among us as Black people. So yeah,
yeah. I mean, and education really is where it's all at,
yeah.
and it's the way we will learn from, well, hopefully, I mean, if we don't know, and I'm just really amazed, that something like that, which is such a big part of the history of this country,
Hmm.
I mean, even in Germany, I mean, we didn't probably touch on it that much either, but we also knew, that, the Black history and the slaves and all of that, which to us, of course, was like, really, why would we have something like that, in like not too far back, and how can that even happen, and so I'm glad, that at least like with homeschooling, for instance, I love the concept of homeschooling actually that you
Yeah.
have here in the US. You don't have that in Germany. In Germany, you have to go to a school.
Oh,
That's
okay.
actually a mandatory legal requirement, and things might be changing, of course. I mean, I haven't lived over there in a long time. But that's how it always was. And so tell me a little bit more about, you touched a little bit on it when you talked about like microaggressions,
Hmm.
because there have been instances, like in groups or, like both like in person or online groups, where, for instance, white people mistake one Black person for another, because they think all Black people look alike. And so is that something you've kind of seen in?
Yeah. I mean, I'm gonna go out on a whim and say that they didn't do it intentionally, but I still think that, you know, more attention could be paid. So it happens quite often and probably a lot more than people care to admit. You know, all Black people don't look alike, and you know,
I mean, it's awful, you know. I mean,
yeah,
it's I mean, and I've seen it also with Asian people. It's like we think
yes,
all,
yeah,
you know,
it's
they're all
you know,
Chinese,
kind of
or
the
I
same.
mean, it's like no, you know.
Yeah, and you know, making excuses like, oh, well, your names start with the same letters or they end or they sound similar and stuff like that. Like that's not really an excuse and it doesn't make that Black person or person of color, it doesn't make them feel any better when you try to,
No,
you know, use that
no.
as an excuse, you know, to
So
as an apology or so or some sort.
so what do you feel would be like? I mean, I can imagine if someone does that, you know, then I mean, you're basically putting your foot in it, and it's like, oh my gosh, how am I going to dig myself out of this? And you know what people then get, like they overcompensate and they,
Yeah,
you know,
they
I mean,
backpedal and
what do you feel would be like a more appropriate action, you know, if that happens, you know? So if I did this, I mean, what would be helpful?
well, I think the first thing to do is like offer a genuine apology,
Yeah.
you know, start there and then make an effort to actually get to know the people. Like if it's happening in like in a Facebook group or, you know, or any other kind of group, whether it's
Yeah.
online or in person, you know, depending on how big the group is, you might not have an opportunity to get, you know, intimate with everybody, you
Yeah.
know, at that level, but at least, you know, make an effort to get to know the people in the group, you know their names, know what they do, you know, what
Yeah.
any kind of common interests you have, because obviously you're all in this group for a reason. Like you're not just random people coming together, like
Yeah.
something brought you all together. So, you know, make an effort to get to know who's in the group. I mean, that's what the point of a lot of these
Yeah.
networking groups are to
Yeah. No, no,
make
absolutely,
connections.
you know. And also look at people, you know. I mean,
Yeah,
actually look at them, you know,
see
don't
them.
just like see them exactly, you know, see them. And I think that probably applies to like many situations, you know,
Yeah,
where I think ultimately actually seeing someone is one of the best things we can do for one another, you
yeah,
know, and really, and maybe nowadays, maybe it's become harder to do this because our attention spans are so short, and we have all these preconceived ideas, you know, based on, you know, I guess our own upbringing and the
mhm.
environment we move in and all of that, you know. But really, I would say, you know, if something like that happens, really go inside and question, well, where did this come from? Where did this
Yeah,
come from? You know, why do I think that? You know, why
yeah,
do I think that, you know, in this case, most Black people look alike, you know, but where does this come from? You know,
yeah.
and how, yeah, you know, how can I, you know, change that and change my own conception about this as
Yeah,
well, you
I
know.
totally agree with that.
And
I do that as a person, not necessarily, you know, when I'm interacting with white people or other races. I just do that in general, like when things come up, like, okay, where did that come from? Like,
yeah,
did I learn that somewhere? Did I read it somewhere? Or did I just
yeah,
hear it somewhere and it kind of stuck? You know, is that really true? So, yeah,
yeah,
I totally agree with that.
exactly, you know. So, you know, I mean, it's like all of these things, you know, it does require some effort, you know, but I think it's worthwhile because this is really, it's almost like these situations, you know, in a way, it's actually good that they happen because then that's like where we can hook in, you know,
Hmm.
and where we can start to make changes, you know.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, this situation is a good example of why, you know, like something that I've certainly seen a lot online is where, you know, people of color offer programs or services specifically only for other people of color, you know,
Yeah.
because they want to offer a safe container, you know, they want to offer a safe space. And that is really also, you know, what we wanted to talk about in this conversation is, you know, how do we create safe spaces for everyone?
Yeah.
And I can see how a situation like that is a really good example why, you know, a person of color would want to be in more of a safe environment, you know,
Mhm.
where they are seen, where they are recognized, where they can thrive, you know, without not just worrying about prejudice or, but also things like safety and, so providing a safe space. But when when we had like our pre-chat about this, you made an interesting comment about that. You called it, and I'm just going to refer to my notes here, segregation, but in a nice way. Tell me a bit more about that.
That's kind of like how I see it. And I'm not saying that these spaces aren't needed because they absolutely are. And I've actually sought them out. And I think it's unfortunate that some of these safe spaces are hard to find or they're shut down really quickly because it's felt that Black people shouldn't have things that are just for them, that we should include everybody. But it's like, well, that's kind of not fair because you guys segregated us before. Why is it okay for white people to segregate but not Black people?
And
but
white people have clubs too that are only for white people,
It's like, and you guys have your clubs and things like that. And I'm like, that's fine. And the reason I call it segregation in a nice way is because, again, we need those spaces and we need to feel safe because, and I think safety is a big point because a lot of times as Black people, or especially as Black women, probably for Black men too, but that's a different scenario. I can't speak to that because I'm not a Black man. But as a Black woman, sometimes allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and talk about what's happening in our lives, that can kind of be shut down by other white women simply because that's just not their experience. Like, it's like, oh, well, if that's happening, just do this. Well, we don't always have the resources to do what you're suggesting. We don't have, the help that that we might need to do what it is you're suggesting. So a lot of times that safety comes in where it's hard to be vulnerable because some of the things that we go through and we try to ask for help, they're really just kind of like glossed over as if like it's not really a big deal. And I don't like when people do that on any circumstance, whether it's regarding to race or not, because if something is a big deal to someone, then that means it's a big deal to them. It's important to them. It means something to them. So, don't dismiss another person's, whatever it is that they're saying or whatever it is that they're struggling with. Don't just dismiss it because it's not your experience. So I think a lot of the safety comes in there.
And it comes back to being seen. Right? It comes back to being seen and to acknowledging that we all have different experiences, and to really, I think that's, that is a really, really good point you make, and that's also why I can certainly see that there is a need for these spaces. And, and I mean, it's funny because I don't know if I put my foot in it so much, but I had a little discussion online once with a person who did this, who created the safe container. And I said, well, but so you do this, but it still is a silo. You're still creating a silo, and isn't what we really want is bring everyone together and have these groups and containers, where everyone feels welcome and safe and seen. And or am I just being utopian in thinking that is important? And it was kind of, because I'm a white person, I tried to be respectful and I understood it, but I also wanted to challenge that a little bit. And when you and I talked about it, I think, well, then what I also then learned was, well, it is, and just for the reasons that you just mentioned, it's important to have these safe spaces, where you can feel you can get what you need, where you're understood, where you're seen, where you can thrive, because ultimately we all want to have, an environment where we can thrive. But then once you get to this point, I think we both agreed, we still in parallel also need these spaces for everyone, because I also felt that to a degree for us, white people, we have a responsibility here too, to create spaces where everyone, regardless of skin color or gender or any of those things, can feel safe. So for instance, I have a group, everyone is welcome, but I monitor, so if I see that something is off, or if someone feels every now and then someone, will come to me and say, hey, someone else said something and it's not okay. So then it's up to me to moderate this. It's up to me to listen to the parties, maybe bring them together if that makes sense, engage in a dialogue. I think dialogue is so important these days.
It is very important.
And I think some white people, I've certainly seen that, they shy away from that. They don't want to make that work for themselves. They don't want to make this effort, if I have all these different people in my group, it's all up to them, and I don't want to, well, then just create your own group, And so it definitely is something where I feel we need to make this effort, and we need to also create these spaces where, in this case, people of color also feel genuinely welcome, and where it's never a question that you are not welcome here and that you will not be seen like we see everyone. And, and where we see you as an individual, you're an individual woman, you're a business owner, you're a mom, all of those things, play into that. Or, you are a Black woman, you have certain needs, and the things that are, maybe very accessible for me, they're not accessible for you. Well, what can I do, if I can, to change that? What can we do in our community to help, and to support? And you mentioned, well, but it's not just you as a white person, I can also do this as a Black person. And and you said something about, you want to be brave, and create something for everyone. What does that look like? And why do you have to be brave?
Well, I think it takes a lot of bravery because I don't want to create a silo. And, I'm saying this out loud and I'll probably get dragged or, commented on, but it doesn't really matter. But at the same time, again, I totally agree that safe spaces are needed, just for Black people and maybe even just for white people. But I feel like there are already people doing that very, very well, to the point that I don't feel the need to create that. I actually want to create what you were just talking about. I want to create a space for when you come out of that silo. Because, if you've been in that silo for so long, what happens when you come back and, quote unquote, interact with the rest of the world? And that's kind of like why I called it segregation in a nice way, because you can't stay in the silo forever. We're not going to change anything if we don't come together. So there needs to be that dialogue that you were just talking about. And, like I said, a lot of people, both white and Black, but, maybe more so white. I'm not really sure about that statistic, but they do like to shy away from the conversation because the conversation forces you to see the person. You're not going to talk to someone with your back to them. You have to sit there and you have to listen. And dialogue is two ways. It's two people. If you're only talking to yourself, that's a monologue. So,
Yes.
dialogue requires more than one person to come to the table and actually exchange some words. And so I think the reason they shy away is because it's uncomfortable. And it's the same on, for people like myself, as Black people. I mean, some Blacks are not afraid to come to the table and, say their piece. I'm not kind of like that. I'm more of a calm, introverted, quiet person. So when I say that I have to be brave, again, I might, be talked about because I don't want to create something that's just for Black people. I want to create something that's for everyone. And I also want to be the moderator that's like, okay, this is happening. Like you said, maybe bring the people together if I think that'll be beneficial.
Yeah.
But, I also want to create a space that, well, yeah, people who look like me feel safe. I also want it to be known that other people are welcome in my circle too. Like, this isn't just for us, this is for everybody. And, if you're not willing to be open to that and, have conversations, and sometimes the conversations will be uncomfortable depending on what it is you're talking about. But I don't think it's a matter of, oh, we're all adults. We should just, go about our business and everything will be fine. Like, no, I think there needs to be people at the forefront facilitating these conversations, because if they don't, these conversations will never happen. And that's why, another reason I call it segregation in a nice way, because it's a way to not have those conversations. And we need those conversations, because otherwise nothing's going to change if we don't.
Yeah. Everything. I agree with all of that, and we've really touched on something that I think is so important and often missing is it's dialogue. Because how often do we witness just these, like, people just talk at each other. They don't talk with each other, and people, when they talk, all they think about is, okay, I just can't wait for this person to be finished because now I want to say my piece.
Yeah.
And it comes down to listening, I think listening, that's what's required, when you have a dialogue, you want to listen to the other person and actually hear what they're saying, regardless of where you are, regardless of your own position. And it's funny, because like that was one, when I grew up, dialogue in the German, vocabulary was huge. My grandparents always talked about it. We need dialogue. And I'm like, what the hell? What are you talking about? But I kind of learned that. And we had these things on TV, they had these discussions where people would have literally sit in two chairs opposite each other. Everyone had a bit of time, and they would have to listen to each other.
Yeah.
And it was just really interesting. And I love that, that we are on the same page here, where we both want to create these spaces, where people feel, because it's all about being seen, being understood, learning. And what you mentioned about, while a lot of people shy away from that because it's uncomfortable. I think it's uncomfortable for many reasons. It's uncomfortable because we have to face up to our own prejudices, and we also have to maybe admit that we don't know something, which is really hard for people, and when you're in the situation, okay, I don't actually really know what this person is talking about, I don't, but I don't want to admit that,
Right.
and so there's a lot of vulnerability there. And and so I mean, in this day and age, there's so much going on, and there are so many, like the activists, the feminists, and all of those people, and I don't know about you, but I sometimes feel like, I mean, that's not really how I do things. I'm not like an activist, I'm not a very shouty person. And very like, was strong, aggressive, or whatever you want to call it, like assertive, like I'm not a very assertive person. But, and you are also, you're more of an introvert and more calm. Well, that's why we get on so well, right?
Exactly.
Because,
and that's exactly why I said I need to be brave, because I'm not that bold, shouty person.
yeah. But still, it doesn't mean that we cannot do our little bit, to affect change, and I feel like, I mean, the ideal world, someone has already actually given the perfect words to that. It's one of my, even when I was younger, when I first heard it in German, because everything used to be translated into German, of course, when I grew up. But was a quote by Martin Luther King, where he said, I want my children to be judged on not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
Yeah.
That to me is really what the world has always needed. The content of our character is ultimately the only thing that should matter. And I don't know. I mean, to me, he's always been such a visionary, and it's like, we're just not ready for this vision. I mean, it's like we get a little closer, and then then something happens again that just takes us all the way back again. And it's like this
vision scares people because it's easier to keep things the status quo.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes. Well, and for whom is it easier, right? You know,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's I sometimes wonder, like for us, like as white people, because if you look at the world population, we're not the majority, actually.
No, you're not.
We're not. And I sometimes actually kind of, because this is what I do, I kind of go off in tangents, thinking about things, and I visualize myself. Well, what if I lived actually in a place where there were mostly, people of color, Black people, and Asians, I mean, everyone, where actually I was the minority. How would that make me feel? And
Yeah.
um and it would probably feel a bit, well, I mean, I have of course been in situations like that, I guess, when I was traveling, so if I traveled to different countries, in the world, um I mean, I have actually been kind of the minority, but only for a very brief period of time, and I was a
Yeah.
tourist.
So have I. When I first
So
started high school, I was the minority because I went to Bowie High School. So when I first started going, and the reason I started going there is because when I was going to the schools in my neighborhoods, apparently I was always a smart kid. And
yeah,
I basically surpassed everyone without really trying to, not to brag, but that's just what happened. So my mother wanted to put me in a school that would actually challenge me. And so she
yeah,
sent me to Bowie High School. We were able to get, like a bus to come pick me up and take me there. So when I first started going, like my ninth grade year, I distinctly remember being the minority because it was, I would say it was about 70% white and maybe 30% black or of color because there were other people there too. And then it wasn't until I got into like maybe 10th and 11th grades that things started to level out and the percentages more like 60-40, and then I think even at one point it was 50-50. So yeah, I've experienced that too, and it is awkward to see so many people that don't look like you and they're like, oh well, why are you here? And it's like, but oh, you're really smart, you can actually keep up with us, and then relationships start forming. That's pretty much how it went.
yeah. So that was really your first experience then, like with
Yeah.
this white world out there, right? And
Exactly. I
with
didn't know it at the time. I just thought,
yeah,
I was the new kid on the block and that was everybody's experience because again, I didn't have those same experiences. It wasn't
yeah,
until later that I looked back on it and I was like, "Oh, that's what that was."
yeah.
Okay.
Well, and I think that is always the thing, like as a Black person. So you don't just have to deal with, well, I'm the new kid and all the things that come with that, which
Yeah.
this can be difficult for anyone, right? When you don't know anyone yet and all this and how you're gonna, fit in all that. But there's always this extra layer, right? Well,
Yeah.
actually the color of my skin is different, so I'm like visibly different, and so so how do we, how do we just not, how do we get rid of this extra layer? How do we, I mean, obviously, it's down to us, to not look at, people of color this way, and to not act the way we then do, when, oh, well, you're a Black kid, and oh, you're smart for a Black kid. Oh my gosh,
Right.
I mean, seriously.
Yeah. Or like when they
um
say, "Oh, your sons are so well spoken." And I'm like, "Well, why
yeah.
wouldn't they be?"
Well,
Yeah.
and it's funny that reminds me, actually, when I lived in London, I dated this Black guy for a while, and he went to one of the private schools in England, and he was extremely posh, and so he had this this posh British accent, and actually friends of mine, when they first met him, they said, "Wow, what do you talk like? I mean, you don't talk like a Black person." They actually said that to him. They were German. We can be a bit direct sometimes. But yeah, you know what? You know how many times people commented on that?
Mm.
Because he was Black and he spoke really posh. And
It's so
it's like,
interesting. When my
you
boys
know,
were younger, before I had my daughter, this is when I was married. I'm divorced now, but we would actually go out to nice restaurants and people would comment that, oh, your sons are using knives and forks. And I'm like, well, what are they supposed to use? Their fingers?
you know,
It tickled
and
me.
that, yeah, but it's like, I mean, we're laughing about this, but it's really wow, I
Yeah.
mean, it's how do we change those conceptions or misconceptions and those, yeah, I mean, it's, I mean, yeah, it's, yeah, I'm a bit speechless, I guess,
Yeah.
because
Like I said, it always tickled me, and I never knew what to say to that because, again, what do you say? Because I'm like, well, why wouldn't they be? Or
yeah,
why wouldn't
yeah,
they use knife and
yeah,
fork?
I
Or,
know, I know.
I think that
I
goes back
mean,
to asking yourself, where did that thought come from? Like, why would I just naturally assume that
yeah,
because they're black, they wouldn't know how to use a knife and fork properly? So, like, where did
yeah,
that come from? So, I think
yeah,
it really goes back to asking yourself that. But I feel like some people, they don't want to ask themselves that. Like, they think that
no,
it's okay to just ask those types of questions. And, but for
I know,
some, like yourself, you'll sit there and be like, well, where did that come from? And then you'll
yeah,
do a little digging and you might, discover it or not,
yeah,
because sometimes it doesn't always come up. But yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean, a bit of self-reflection, and but I think you're right. A lot of people, they just don't want to do that. And I think that is what I often run up against is that, and we've seen that during the pandemic as well. I mean,
Mhm.
all the, I don't want to say stupid people, but all the, you know what I mean, right? All the
Yeah.
people that just don't want to self-reflect, all the people where it's just about themselves and they don't care about other people, and they, for whatever reason, often there's fear, often there's lack of knowledge, that there's all these different reasons why someone might be like ignorant. Maybe ignorant is a better word.
Yeah.
There's a level of ignorance out there, and then I often feel like overwhelmed, because then I feel like, well, there are so many people out there who clearly would benefit from some self-reflection and from, engaging in dialogue and trying
Mhm.
to see others, like really see them and to listen. And but there are many people just have no interest in that. They don't have the
Yeah.
interest, or they don't have the intellect, or they don't have the environment, because like we talked about the silos earlier. There are a lot of white silos too, I mean, there are a
Mhm.
lot of silos in general. The internet, I think, has created a lot of silos
A
where,
lot.
they're just like echo chambers. And then how do you ever, in any situation, not just when it comes to racism, any of those situations, like all the gun crazy people, or, all
Mhm.
the T supporters, I don't even want to say his name, and all the, I mean, all these silos, and how do we ever, it can feel so overwhelming,
It
I think,
can, and it does.
yeah, because who are we, like little Kirsten and little Lakeisha, and who are not even activists, what can we even do?
Yeah, yeah. It
And
reminds me of the Serenity Prayer. You know, I, I
yeah,
I don't say that to myself every morning, but it plays out in my head quite a lot, especially when
remind me again how that goes.
how does it go? It's like, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Different, yes,
So yeah, that plays
yes,
out in my head a lot because it's like when I'm really feeling overwhelmed, because the idea of creating this, community or whatever form it takes to be as a creative, that includes everyone, I kind of get overwhelmed because I'm like, how do you do that? Like, how do you
yeah,
actually, even from a business perspective, like, how do you market this thing? Because, you get people out here who don't want to come together. They feel like everything should be separate or it should just be for one group and not the other. So, even from a business perspective, like, how do you talk about this? How do you market it? Like,
yeah,
should I really be the person to do this? But I really want to do this. So, it's like going on in my head. But yeah, that the serenity prayer usually comes up when I'm feeling overwhelmed to just, scale back, take a few breaths, figure out what it is that I can change, and then, take one or two steps towards that, and then leave everything else for everybody else.
Exactly. Oh, I love that. I love that. I love that you brought this up, because I really feel that sums it up, and to really, to know what we can't change or what is not our place to do, but to also know what can we affect, and to know the difference, and then to just do it. It takes, like, what do they always say? It takes like 1,000 steps, or like the, that little animal, I can't remember. There's some analogy out there somewhere about that. You have to take like 1,000 little steps, and but you still move forward. And so yeah, I love that. I love that. I think that's actually a really great place to kind of conclude our. I mean, we could continue chatting forever and ever and ever, and these conversations are always longer than I plan. People just don't have these attention spans anymore these days. But
they're so good. They're so juicy. I like them.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I love them. And let's keep talking about all these things. And
dialogue.
Dialogue, exactly. Let's I love dialogue,
and dialogue
and
empathy. I think people need that a lot. You don't necessarily have to agree with everything that's being exchanged in the dialogue, but you can at least meet a person where they are, understand where they're coming from. Most of the time, that's really all the other person wants, is for you to understand where they're coming from, not necessarily to agree or disagree. I mean, if you do agree, that's great. But if you don't agree, that's great too.
Yeah, just acknowledge it and agree to disagree, right? And then see if you can find some common ground from where you can move forward.
Exactly.
And maybe that takes some concessions on both sides. Be prepared for that too. And I love that. You and I, we will save this world.
Totally.
I know. But our little corner, that we have, and I'm so glad we had this conversation, and I actually feel really hopeful now. I feel really, I mean, these are such shit times, and I'm sorry for, I don't really swear a lot, but they're such difficult times. Yeah. On so many levels, the world feels crazy, and with the internet, everything is constantly in our face too, and terrible things are happening everywhere, natural disasters, man-made disasters, and even we constantly stand in our own way. And it doesn't always have to be this way. We can certainly create these safe spaces, and I think it's good to know for people that there are these safe spaces. There are safe spaces for every stage of where you need them.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So, I love, that we're creating these safe spaces, so thank you so much, Lakeisha. This has been absolutely delightful, and I'm going to stop our recording now. Thank you so much, everyone else, for listening in. And I always forget this. Give me a little like, if you're still here. And thank you.